Good evening, this is the Oscar expert here with Brother Bro. It's time for the best films of 2020. Despite the pandemic and all the shuffling around of release dates and such, and all the complaints that there were no good movies this year, I think I've got a hell of a top 10. Maybe it's not as strong as other years, but I think every movie in my top 10 is worthy of being in a top 10. I also think we got spoiled last year because everybody knows last year was amazing. But nonetheless, I do have a top 10 that I'm very excited about. I also have to mention that I've seen more movies this year than I have in maybe any other year. I actually saw more movies this year than I saw in others because at the end of the year, I realized that my top 10 was looking a little bit barren. Like I wasn't as passionate about it. So I went and sought out more movies than I otherwise would have, which was kind of interesting about this year. I saw a lot more documentaries than I otherwise would have. So let's get started. Honorable mentions. I'm going to honorably mention Black Bear, Sound of Metal, Relic, 9 Days, Mangrove, Palm Springs, Never Rarely, Sometimes Always, and The Trial of Chicago 7. My honorable mentions are Sound of Metal, The Invisible Man, Minari, Let Them All Talk, Time, and The Trial of Chicago 7. I also want to say, I have not gotten the chance to see The Father this year, which I really wanted to see. And I also want to see Minari again because I think that might grow on me, but I didn't have the chance to do that. So we're going ahead anyway. Number 10 is Beanpole. This is directed by Kantemir Balagov. Not sure if I'm saying the name right, but he is a young Russian filmmaker. The film is a period piece, takes place in post-war Russia. It's about the relationship of two women. And it's sort of about the ability to literally bring new life into the world with pregnancy. But it's also about that in sort of a deeper sense of the time overall. It's very bogged down in sadness and kind of despair, hopelessness about, is there anything really to bring to the world in such a despairing time? And the reason this is a top 10er for me is because this is just so gorgeously shot. I loved how every scene was a long take and that it wasn't just a long take where you're kind of standing back and watching things happen like a very European style. The camera was dynamic and moving around with the characters, and the blocking and the framing would change as the scenes are evolving. The colors and the art direction alone just locked me into the film. And the two lead performances I've not heard many people talk about, but they're some of the best performances of the year. I think the acting is phenomenal in this film. It just had that particular style where I'm paying attention to every little beat that's happening in the story. And there are a lot of moments that are small, but they're very shocking. It was a very sumptuous experience overall. Though it is a slow movie, it's one where I think if you try it out in the first 30 minutes and you feel like this is your kind of movie, you will like it. My number 10 is Boys State. This film was extremely entertaining, shot in a way that felt very cinematic, and it captures everything that I hate and everything that I love about politics. This was one of the most emotionally impactful films of the year, and I didn't see that coming even from the first half. There's so much in it that is inspiring and makes me hopeful for our future. And there's so much that is discouraging. It was also an interesting look at how we grow politicians in this country and perhaps the mistakes that we're making when we lay the seeds and we water those very seeds. At number 9, I have Collective, which is up for foreign film and documentary this year. It's about a team of journalists who investigate a tragic fire at a concert that killed, I think 50 or so people. And a lot of these deaths happened after the event due to negligence in the hospitals that were caring for all of these burn victims. The film is very dry and visually it's almost flat and kind of desaturated, but this is very appropriate because I think the thesis of this film is that heroism exists in all kinds of areas, and some of them are in very bland, tedious, and slow-moving ways, where change is happening inch by inch, and you're fighting tooth and nail in these very dry, procedural ways. But it's honoring the people who are so important in moving that needle. It ends up being a very universal David and Goliath story, and it's about the way that money in politics destroys the lives of many innocent people. This is just such a poignant and true to our times message that I would encourage everybody to give it a watch. My number 9 film is Relic. This is my favorite horror movie that I saw this year. It completely dug deep into my skin. The end was, I stand by it, the best ending in any horror movie that I've ever seen. In my opinion, that's where a lot of horror movies sort of falter. This one is for sure slow to start. And when I think back on the movie, I don't necessarily think about that first half. I really think about that last third. But boy, has it stuck with me. It's a film about the horrors of taking care of a loved one as they disintegrate in front of you. But when you look deeper, it's also about the beauty of that dedication. The makeup in this film is stunning. And there are some surreal elements in the third act that I was just a huge fan of. The last 5 minutes of this movie was shocking and devastating to me, and it remains the only horror movie to actually make me cry. My number 8 is Lovers Rock, my favorite film of the Small Axe series, directed by Steve McQueen. The reason Lovers Rock is higher than Mangrove here is because it doesn't tell as specific or maybe even impactful of a story, but it does so much more in a way. The film just breathes. Like, the film is air. It's life. It's kind of everything like beautiful about this time and a place without really having any drama whatsoever, which is kind of hilarious. There are just amazing vibes in this movie, and it's so cinematic. It's beautifully shot, some of the best cinematography of the year. And there are scenes that just play out long enough that at some point you feel like, okay, maybe this is going on too long. And then just when you feel that, it becomes something new. It starts morphing and evolving. From a directing standpoint, like, Steve McQueen just gets so much out of a scene. This is a film about joy. It's about good vibrations, the energy that people felt during this time. And it's kind of a tribute to all the things that we don't normally talk about in period films, like the enjoyment that people got out of being alive. My number 8 film is Palm Springs. This is probably the most just purely enjoyable film, maybe of the whole year. These type of straightforward comedies rarely make year-end lists for me, but I had to include Palm Springs because not only is it like genuinely hilarious with a great like modern sense of humor, it is genuinely fantastic performances from Kristen Milioti, Andy Samberg. It's brilliantly written, beautifully constructed. The screenplay by Andy Ciara is one of the best of the year, just flat out. It's inventive and playful, but what takes it up to another notch is that it is heartfelt and kind of meaningful. Like, I really think that there's some depth here about exploring relationships. Like when Andy Samberg's character at the end says, "We're already sick of each other. It's the best." That is a genuinely poignant moment. Whenever I think about this movie, I'm just like, oh, Palm Springs, that movie just rules on like every level. I just had to include it on this list. My number 7 is I Carry You With Me, which has colored how I view this journey of crossing the Mexico-US border that so many people take. This movie made me think a lot about sacrifice and what that means in a way that I never have before because I have such a privileged life. It's actually a really good companion piece with a film I saw at Sundance this year called Flee, which is equally as great. And it's really about what we give up to give opportunities, the people that sacrifice what they have to give us opportunities. And it's also about what people who undertake this journey and people who have an immigrant experience are leaving behind and what their connection is with that. Oftentimes people are not able to go back to the countries that they fled from, and that's really sad. It brought me so intimately into the experience of an immigrant, and I'll probably never forget it. I love the way that the documentary filmmaking ties into the fictional filmmaking because it separates the two worlds in a very distinct way that is central to the main theme of the story. It's also a really beautifully shot movie and a great romance. There's nothing I didn't like about it, and I really hope people see it when it comes out. And I think it's probably the most underrated film on my list this year. The movie's actually not officially out yet. I believe they're planning a release in 2021 for this movie, like theatrically or streaming, whatever they choose to do. So if you're like, where can I see this movie? It's because you actually can't see it anywhere yet. My number 7 pick is Nomadland. This is a film that I've seen twice now. And on the second viewing, I feel like I got a better understanding of Fern's journey and where she was at mentally. Chloe Zhao's direction in this film is some of the most unique I've ever seen. Yes, it's sort of resembles maybe Terrence Malick's style, but the way that she brings the film set onto these real locations and integrates it with real actors without feeling like she's intruding there gives the movie a sense of authenticity that I don't know if any other filmmaker could bring in the same way. The cinematography and the editing style is also just very unique. It really feels like Chloe Zhao has discovered a sort of new way to look at cinema. And that's why I really want her to win the director Oscar. And Frances McDormand's performance is potentially the best I've seen the entire year. The way that she's able to be so grounded, just the privilege of being able to watch Frances McDormand's endlessly expressive face is too great to put into words. We can view the movie as a great transcendental text. I love how it doesn't try to like impose thoughts or opinions onto this lifestyle. It just kind of lets us live it and experience it and to discover for ourselves what the characters like about it. And it's also a interesting portrait of grief and a character study for Fern. I'm really excited that this is like a huge Oscar contender this year. Definitely one of the best picture nominees that we will have. My number 6 is Nomadland. I also felt like my second viewing really enriched this film for me, and I would even go in a third time, and I didn't expect to enjoy it as much, if not even more. My takeaway from the film is that it's sort of an investigation into how we go through life after certain people depart from it, which is just a natural cycle of life. It's how we're forced into new waves and cycles and what we do to move on, or to what extent can we even move on from that. A lot of these nomads struggle with this idea that they're spending too much time trying to get ahead financially, but they don't spend enough time actually living life. And so it's a sort of question of like, how do you rebel against the system of like paycheck to paycheck capitalism? And what can you do to live a satisfying and actually whole life? And what does it mean to really live a full life? So it's kind of about a lot of stuff, which is why maybe it was hard for me to like attach to one thing on the first viewing, but it does make me excited to revisit the film. I do think that the first act and like maybe the last 15 minutes are the strongest parts of the film because of how Chloe Zhao, much like a documentarian, investigates the lives of these real life nomads, and their stories are often the most interesting parts of the film. And Chloe Zhao is an awesome pick to win Best Director, and we know she's gonna win. Number 6 is Promising Young Woman. I saw this film in a completely different light after seeing it a second time. I think I could get something out of it even watching it again. It's a movie that really challenges you to think about the culture around sexual assault. It examines the issue from a lot of different levels, but it also presents a really interesting character study for Carey Mulligan's character. And without that character study, I think the movie could feel a little unnatural. But the way that we come to enjoy the characters opening up in the middle of the movie, I think really gives it an emotional pull for what occurs towards the end. I really appreciated that the ending felt like it was designed to invoke different reactions in people. And I didn't think that the movie was trying to get me to feel a certain way about it. I felt it was kind of more of an emotional ending than people often give it credit for. And it's just an entertaining, genre-bending film about a subject that continues to go under-examined in our culture, and also one with an incredible attention to detail in every aspect of production due to Emerald Fennell's direction. I'm really excited that the film is becoming such a heavyweight Oscar contender. My number 5 is The Invisible Man. This is my favorite horror film of the year, and I'm actually getting kind of sad and wistful thinking that this is one of the last movies I experienced in theaters before the pandemic with a giant audience. And it was made so much better by that. I watched it in Dolby Sound, and I think that really impacted my experience of the movie because I was like absolutely riveted. It was like one of the most thrilling movies I've ever seen. And I've talked to other people who've seen it. They don't really seem to share that experience. And I wonder if it's because they watched it on demand. But this was literally edge of my seat stuff. I'm really excited for what the director Leigh Whannell does next because his control over like the camera made this film really special. And I like that the film integrated a real life horror that a lot of women experience of controlling and abusive men. It makes it all the more intense and thrilling and terrifying and also satisfying. My number 5 film is The Assistant. It is definitely a film that has divided audiences because it is a slow burn, but I was completely transfixed with this film from start to finish because yes, it operates in the mundane, but it finds something in the mundanity that feels so permeable. This movie made me feel utterly powerless, just being in the skin of this character for a day, played by Julia Garner, who gives potentially my favorite performance of the year. She brought so much in every little facial expression that she did. The movie captures a feeling of helplessness that I think really resonates with the time that we're living in, where people are aware of abuses of power, but they are not in a position of power where they can do anything about it. What does it feel like to just kind of soak that in? And what does it do to a person? And this movie just beautifully captured a really specific feeling that makes it feel like a defining movie of this Me Too sort of era through its quiet approach and its minimalism. It has great sound design, editing, the cinematography, everything I think really worked together to create something special here. My number 4 is Time, and I'm really excited to talk about this one because I haven't yet. This would be a great companion piece to a movie like 13th, which is very didactic about the prison industrial complex. This one looks at a family that is affected by the incarceration of the father/husband. And it's so vital to have films like this that take a humanistic approach to prisons and say, how does this affect human beings? Incarcerating somebody does not just have an effect on the person who is being punished. It also has an economic and psychological effect on families everywhere. And it's sad to think that we live in the country where this is the most prevalent of any other country in the world, where families are growing up without this figure in their lives. It's about all the time that passes between the moments that we get to enjoy with the ones that we love the most. And it humanizes this number that we slap onto people, that you're worth this amount of years in prison, this crime's worth this amount of years, in a system that has absolutely no regard for forgiveness or for whether a person can actually reform. And it has no regard for the families of that person. The ending had the biggest impact on me of any film this year, where it just made me like sob. I want to recommend this at like the highest level to everybody. I might be like preaching a little bit here, but we grow up and this idea of like putting people in jail is just so ingrained in us. That's how things are. And if you commit a crime, you do something wrong, and like you just get put in a cell. Like that's so dehumanizing. I understand that there are people who are taking away loved ones from other people, and perhaps it's the right punishment for them. But for so many crimes, this is not an appropriate punishment. It's antithetical to so much of what we should stand for as a country and just as human beings. It's depriving people of a relationship with a loved one. I mean, maybe this is the most important film on here. The reason maybe it's not number 1 is because I think the end is so powerful, but the rest of the film is like a bit boring, to be honest, to the point where I think it could lose a lot of people, but everybody really needs to give this film a shot. My number 4 film is And Then We Danced. This film is brimming with the discovery of oneself and of love. It captures like this antsy feeling of like, when am I going to get to see this person that's exciting me? And all those like wonderful butterfly intense feelings that you get as a young person discovering love. But not only that, it's also a movie about discovering parts of yourself that are new and what a character chooses to do when they're confronted with a society that doesn't conform to the way that they are. What I think the director does really, really strongly here is finding exciting ways to express the characters' like energy that they just have building up. Like the way that they dance and the way that they move, it's such a physical movie. I think few films are able to capture like that sort of energy. The lead performance is great, and the ending in particular features this really beautiful dance. The last shot when that door closes is just a slap in the face to me. The movie gets my heart pumping. I just think it's like exhilarating. I would definitely recommend it to like the A24 crowd. You know who you are. My number 3 is Boys State. I appreciate that the directors who made this were looking for a way to come to terms with what's happening in our country, with the division and just with how politics is working, how people are so unsatisfied with it. And this film basically shows you a microcosm of our system. We see how young men are interpreting the actions of adults and imitating them. We see how they're trying to reform in very positive ways. It can definitely make you equally cynical and hopeful for politics at once, which I think is just brilliant. I love that we have 2 competing feelings about politics, because that is very true, I think, to how politics feels in real life. Becoming so invested in a campaign in this little documentary, and then having like this emotional experience to the outcome of that election made me realize something about like myself and how people feel about elections in general, how we get so caught up in the emotion of them and the rhetoric and what we feel they represent. There were so many parts of this movie that just made me say, yes, that is a part of our politics. That's a part of our politics. It makes me hopeful that the next generation can bring a new life into politics where the positions aren't so gridlocked and so incompatible. I can't wait to see Girl State, and I just wanted more of this film. I wanted like a 5-hour cut. My number 3 film is I Carry You With Me. Like you were saying earlier, it makes me think a lot about what the immigrant experience is. This movie captured a really profound feeling of your heart being in 2 places at once. It's a brilliant look at how the past, present, and future is all weighing down on our central characters at once. The way that these characters are carrying their past with them, the idea of their future with them, and each other in the present. This was deeply affecting. And it's a beautifully crafted movie. The cinematography and the editing in this movie is some of the best I've seen all year. I would nominate those 2 aspects of the film. The way that the cinematography paints this dreamlike portrait of Mexico, of their past, and how the editing seamlessly integrates documentary footage into the third act that represents where they are now in this kind of sober, more raw state. So in many ways, the movie is like boundary pushing, and it really pays off. And it all comes together to create an experience that is kind of beyond words. The way that it captures nostalgia and hope and longing. I just think that this is a fantastic piece of cinema. I hope to see this movie get a lot more attention when it actually comes to whatever kind of release it will eventually get. I think it really deserves your attention. My number 2 is Promising Young Woman. As many people know, I love this film. What was special for me was how we were put in the shoes of somebody who is watching others who have committed these acts of violence towards women just move on through life, just breeze on through. And here you are going, nobody is doing anything about this. There's just so many men out there that are at every club or every bar waiting to like traumatize somebody. And the men that have committed these acts in the past are moving forward and getting married. And there's just a sense of like something needs to be done. Like justice needs to be served. And so I love that that is the core of this film. It implicates men in a way that many films just have avoided. It's sort of putting society as a whole on trial here, which is not something we see very often. Often we get a movie like Bombshell, where we have a Harvey Weinstein-like figure that once we take them down, everything is going to be okay. This film is just about our culture, and it's just about the frustration we feel with the fact that there's so much that enables this abuse to continue. It's such an important topic. I mean, I think most of us know people who have been through traumatizing things like this. And Emerald Fennell does this in a way that's just enjoyable and makes a great film. My number 2 film is 9 Days. This is actually going to come out this year, in the summer probably. That means it's probably going to make people's lists next year, but since I saw this movie 2 times this year, it would feel wrong for me not to include it on my 2020 list. This was the most emotionally impactful film experience I had the entire year. I can't even put a finger on what it is about the perspective that this film puts you in, where you're kind of looking at life from this outside perspective that sort of opens the floodgates, makes you sort of realize the beauty that you might miss. And it sounds cliche as hell. Maybe like it is a little bit, but it works. It genuinely made me feel appreciative of life. There are things in this movie like the sand between your toes and the wind going through your hair on a bike ride. That sounds so dumb when I tell you, but the way that it depicts them, it makes me cry. It has one of the best endings I've seen the entire year. And in that ending, we have a tour de force Winston Duke performance where his character kind of explodes with life. I mean, there are multiple points in this movie that really got me both times I watched it, and that's how I knew that the film held up. Sometimes you rewatch films and the emotional experience dulls, but this one, it really didn't. I think it's a really special film that can make you appreciative of your life and look at it in a different way. You could also argue that it's an insightful look at depression. So I just love the film, and I'm really curious to see when it comes out what everybody's reactions are, because I think a lot of people are going to be really moved by it. Yeah. Again, the emotional experience of the year for me. And my number 1, not by a crazy long shot, because I have so many films on here that I love, but it is I'm Thinking of Ending Things, because I'm a sucker for Charlie Kaufman. I love everything that he's trying to offer us. He may be the most honest filmmaker working, just because what he's exploring about ourselves and like the depths within us. He explores like depression and loneliness in a way that makes you just say like, yes, that is a part of the human experience. I think this is his best directed film. As much as I love Synecdoche, New York, I'm so excited to see the direction that his career is turning in. I feel like this film is as ambitious as any he's ever made. And his style, the visual style in this film, the cinematography, and the way that scenes are allowed to just go on, and the way that the story is told, like in terms of the structure and who's even telling the story, it's all so inventive and creative that it just gets me completely energized about cinema. I wish this film was getting screenplay and director nominations at the Academy Awards, but it doesn't seem like it. I have just not seen a story told like this where you can watch it a second or even third time and uncover more about it, or even just see a completely different movie. And at the core, it's just such a fucking sad movie about our imaginations and the role they play in our lives. You know, this film in particular is about like the breaking point of when imagination isn't enough of a safety net for you, and what it's like to like fall through that. It explores, in the way that Charlie Kaufman's best films do, the inner psyche. Other films just seem like they are not doing that. I'm happy Netflix is here to give Charlie Kaufman the budget and the sort of deals and the contracts that he needs to create his art. And I hope that the world appreciates it as much as I do. I'm gonna piggyback right off that one. My number one film of the year is also I'm Thinking of Ending Things. This movie actually frustrated the hell out of me the first time I watched it. Like, I couldn't stop thinking about it, and I just needed to uncover and see what was there. And so I watched it again, and I was completely blown away by the different movie that I saw. All these little details come together in a way that I was just astonished by. And maybe not everybody will be willing to give the film that time that you actually do need to kind of dedicate to it to unlock those riches. But just being a fan of Charlie Kaufman, I feel like I definitely owed it to him. It's more than worth a second or third watch. It feels like a really mature work, like as a director for him. And I've never seen anything like it that explores this completely internal experience that nobody will ever be able to see. And as sad and as depressing as it is, and as insightful as it is about sadness and depression, it's also just a beautiful piece of cinema because it shows us the inner workings of somebody's mind. I've never seen a character study like this one, because the way that the film allows you to discover who this person is completely unlike anything I've seen. I just want to spoil the hell out of this movie so I can talk about why I love it so much. But we have a spoiler review for that I can just refer you to, because we really enjoyed talking about this movie. I will remember the movie by the end of the decade. This is a movie for the ages, folks, and one that is so unique in presentation, but ultimately in what matters, like what it's trying to say and how it's saying it. And that makes it the movie of the year for me. Looking forward to another year of fantastic movies. We've already seen 20 from Sundance, but there's going to be lots more. I love talking about the films that I love because it makes me love them again. And then it makes me love cinema and be thankful for all the great experiences that we've had in the cinemas this year, or not in the cinemas. Hopefully you get to re-experience the passion that you felt towards some of these films if you liked them, or if there's a film in here that you haven't heard about. Definitely see if it would be up your alley if you want to watch it. Thank you for watching. Thank you for subscribing. How fast can you count to 10?